last week the state settled the first Lariam damages case by a Defence Force member, a very significant event in the Action Lariam campaign, which has been ongoing for several years, where the plaintiff, Anthony Cole, stated he was delighted, giving you an indication of the substantial damages that the state had to pay out. Now, this was a case where the state put up no defence of the indefensible, called no witnesses and adduced no evidence to defend the case. Instead, in an approach that would make the Garda Commissioner's legal team blush, the state launched a vicious attack on the plaintiff and his witnesses. His honesty was questioned, he was accused of perjury, and the state's whole case was that he was lying about the symptoms he suffered while in Chad. But we all know, and I know you know, Minister, from your time as Minister for Defence, that Defence Forces members who've taken Lariam, some of them have experienced very devastating consequences. Nightmares, anxiety, hallucinations, depression, mood swings, mania, psychosis, utterly devastating consequences are experienced. That's a medical fact. Yet knowing that, the state's whole case was that he was lying. 2 senior counsel, 2 junior counsel, 10 days of hearings over 5 months, at the cost of a huge stress to the plaintiff, an enormous cost to the state. And despite this, and despite a vote in this House today, Defence Forces policy remains the same. Lariam is the first choice anti-malarial for members in sub-Saharan Africa, including Mali. Saying no to Lariam is saying no to overseas duty. Admitting that you have a mental health problem means an end of your Defence Forces career. It's an absolute disgrace. And we have seen time and again in medical injuries case the state adopting a very adversarial approach through long and unnecessary court cases. By the end of 2016, outstanding liabilities on the state for damages in cases under health, justice and defence was €2 billion. A staggering figure. And the winners here are the lawyers. 24 million last year paid out to lawyers from the State Claims Agency for the state's own defence, and 41 million in plaintiff legal fees. So in light of the massive costs, Taoiseach, and the fact that the state didn't even bother to try and defend itself during the case, I have 2 questions for you. And the first one is, will you heed the outcome of this case, and indeed the motion passed in this House last summer, and immediately and without delay issue instructions to the Defence Forces to cease all use of Lariam? And secondly, will you take urgent steps to establish a redress or compensation scheme for Defence Forces members who have been harmed by the taking of this terrible neurotoxic drug, and save the state a fortune in unnecessary and costly legal challenges?
Thank you, Deputy Daly. Taoiseach.
Yeah, Deputy, I can remember us having this debate when I was in the line department, and what I said at the time was that politicians should not be deciding the medication that people are prescribed, whether it's in the Defence Forces or anywhere else for that matter. We're not qualified to do it. And what the Department of Defence has been consistently trying to do, and what the Defence Forces have consistently been trying to do, is to ensure that they make responsible decisions on the back of the best available medical advice in relation to medication that's offered for service personnel when they're overseas. We have an obligation to ensure that we protect against malaria, and we have an obligation to ensure that appropriate options are available for serving personnel. We also have an obligation to recognise that Lariam does have adverse effects on certain people. And as a result of that, it's important that we have a very clear screening process in place to ensure that people who may be adversely affected by taking Lariam are actually screened early, and that alternatives are offered to them, or else that they perhaps don't go on a mission to a part of the world where malaria is relevant. All of that is happening in the Defence Forces, Deputy. That is my understanding. I'm not familiar with the individual legal case that you refer to, so I think it's dangerous for me to comment on that. What I will do, of course, is ask the Minister to come back to you on that question as to whether that case sets a precedent or not. I simply don't know the circumstances around that case, so I think it would be wrong to offer any advice on that without that detail. But what I will say is that I have met a number of families who have had family members affected by Lariam and the consequences of taking it, and they feel very strongly about it, and I recognise that, and we need to handle that responsibly. Having said that, we shouldn't make decisions that is contrary to the best medical advice that we have at the moment in the context of how we treat this issue. There is no simple way to deal with protecting our troops against malaria. We have to take appropriate choices based on medical advice, and I think that's what we should continue to do.
Thank you, Taoiseach. Deputy Daly.
I think the best medical advice and practical advice you could recognise is that the state has just agreed to pay out substantial damages to a member of our defence forces who's been harmed by the use of Lariam. And against the backdrop where 42 members of the Defence Forces were prescribed it last year, why in God's name are we continuing to do this when there are other viable anti-malarial drugs out there on the market? It's an absolute, it just doesn't add up. You talk about responsible decision making, and I agree with you, and I don't expect you to know the details of the case, but believe me, they are relevant to all of the other cases, the 60 other Lariam damages cases which are in the pipeline, and the likelihood now of many others joining that list in light of the Cole case which concluded last week. So what I would ask you is, when you do get the answer to that, and you can say that that case does affect a broader group of people, would it not be reasonable to abandon adversarial court proceedings and instead take the responsibility and agree to establish a redress or compensation scheme? There are some elements of that scheme in Australia for Lariam users, in the UK not entirely perfect, but they go some way to dealing with that. And you've got to intervene with the Defence Forces and stop more people potentially joining that list who will have to seek redress in the future.
Yeah, no, look, I mean, I think it is important to say there are many people who have used Lariam and it's been very successful, myself included. And there wasn't any, but I do want to say that there are clearly families and individuals who are vulnerable to Lariam. But not every case that's been taken against the state is the same. And the Department of Defence and the Defence Forces need to make appropriate choices in relation to that, as to whether there is precedent that needs to be followed following the settling of one case or not. And I think it would be unreasonable of you, Deputy, to ask me to comment in detail on that case, which I don't think you are, to be fair, until I've actually seen the detail of it. And I think that is a matter for the Minister for Defence.
Thank you very